Hello, I'm Darryl Wu, President-elect of My Sister's House Board of Directors.
I'm Angela Lai, Advisory Member of My Sister's House, a nonprofit organization. Today, we will show aspects of healthy and unhealthy relationships to raise your awareness of domestic violence in our community.
We are a part of My Sister's House, a Sacramento-based nonprofit organization focusing on serving the needs of Asian and Pacific Islander women and children impacted by domestic violence. My Sister's House provides a culturally appropriate and responsive safe haven and community services. In a continuing effort to spread the word about domestic violence prevention, My Sister's House brings you this special program.
You are watching Healthy Relationships, brought to you by the Office of Violence Against Women.
In past episodes, we have heard of emotional abuse that affects a person psychologically. We have heard of physical abuse, which inflicts pain and bodily injury on its victims. On today's episode of Healthy Relationships, we will talk about spiritual abuse, which prevents or forces someone from practicing their religious beliefs or uses spiritual beliefs to manipulate or control the other person.
Think about your daughter, sister, cousin, niece, or granddaughter, or mother. How can you make sure that they are in a healthy relationship? And what should you do if you find yourself or a loved one in an unhealthy relationship?
We know this is a tough subject to talk about, and it's especially tough in our Asian and Pacific Islander communities because of the customs in our cultures.
It is especially tough for women in our Asian and Pacific Islander communities to deal with bad relationships. In this episode, we have two women, Carol and Rosa, who will talk about the struggles as a survivor and how they face spiritual abuse. First, we have Carol, who shares her story. Carol, we appreciate you taking the time to come down today to share your story. How do you meet your husband?
I met my husband when I was an international student here. One of my friends introduced us.
Do you talk about religion with him prior to getting married?
Oh yes, because I'm a Christian. So in the very beginning, when we're dating, I clarify it because for my faith, I want to marry a Christian. So we talk about it. Then he converted to a Christian because he wanted to get married with me.
Did he allow you to practice your own religion?
In his opinion, he thought that church is only the place that they brainwash people to get their political issue or political purpose. So that's his own opinion. So he disagreed with that. And that time I had no money, no car, so I couldn't go to church at all.
What types of abuse occurred in the relationship?
The form of the abuses I have been through are financial abuses, isolation, verbal abuse, some sort of sexual abuse. He drank a lot, and especially nighttime, he become like very angry, and then he will throw out temper. A lot of time that he did not really sleep at all. He just watched maybe not really proper movies during the night.
Did he ever use faith or scripture to pressure you into doing something you did not want to do?
Sometimes that he would use the scriptures to mislead or force me to do things improperly or maybe feel really uncomfortable. Like he would say in Bible, husband and woman should be one in God's eye, or husband should be the head of the household. He will misinterpret it, and they want me to do things. Sometimes sexually, he used his own way to normalize it, to sanctify that kind of situation or say relationship.
What made you decide to pursue a divorce?
During this marriage, I lived in fear for years. And so a lot of times during the night or midnight, I pretended that I was asleep, but because he has maybe drank a lot and then talking backwards, watching some kind of movie. So I was scared, and like I usually close myself in the room and then pretended I was asleep, but actually I heard everything. So then I decided to file divorce, and I went through kind of a workshop, and people helped me. Actually, not only me, but a lot of women's been through this kind of abuses. They help us to go step by step how to file the divorce, and then women had a chance to ask questions, maybe legally, or kind of problem, or how do we face it, how do we proceed it. So a lot of women like me got help.
Did he try to discount your religion in court?
Yes, when I was in the court to pursue the divorce, because I'm a Christian, so he also used this against me. He filed some kind of false messages. He said something like the churches I attend, they were doing cults, and he put it in the documentation a link, which is a church from other states. The churches' names are similar, but it's not. It's from some other state. For the court, they just want to get the cases done. And since that, for many abuses that I have no evidence of physical abuse, so they did not consider this is abuse.
Did you seek help from your church or spiritual leaders?
Because I have no friends, no family here, and a lot of the situation in our marriage is very private. I do not know who to talk to, or sometimes it's embarrassed to talk to. So the only way I seek is I talk to pastor's wife about my situation. Although it's not very detailed, but just roughly talk about it, and they know I have a difficulty. They try to help me spiritually also. There's a stage that my pastor, he handed out me a DV hotline to call, but I did not really realize that I was in an abusive situation because I do not have any idea what is abuse.
How did you get help?
One of my friend, she understood what I've been through, so she gave me one more time a DV hotline again. So I did not call right away. I postponed it probably 2 weeks or so until I was really scared.
How did you get safe?
I talk about my situation, and they transfer me to my sister's house, and I had to talk to a person. She know that I'm in a dangerous situation. So after we talk, she told me where we're supposed to meet. So I met her in a public place, and then she took me to my sister's house the same day evening when I called her. So right away, I and my son were put into my sister's house. That's the time that I realized I had been through a lot of abuses. I never had any idea. So step by step, and then they helped me, and I decided that I do not want this kind of life anymore. I do not want to live in fear for the rest of my life.
Carol, what advice would you give to someone who is watching this show and who might be in an abusive relationship?
Even my pastor, they did not say they encouraged me to divorce or not divorce, but they offered me a hotline to call for help. And I believe God created us to let us have a good life, the life to glorify Him. Our Father will not let His children in the dangerous situation or in the hurting situation. That's not what I believe. None of the people supposed to have a abusive situation.
Carol, thank you again for sharing your story with us.
如果你是正在就是你的婚姻里面处在你是被一个虐待的情况，不管你是在经济上你被控制住，你没有出口，或者是你在身体上，或者是你在精神上，或者是你在言语上都受到虐待的话，就如同好像我现在所经历的一样，那么呢，我希望你能够走出那样子的恐惧跟害怕的阴影。而且虽然在我们当中离婚是一个羞耻不光荣的事情，但是我相信每个人在神的眼光里面，我们是值得有一个被尊重，一个好的生活。所以如果你遇到这样的情形，如果你是基督徒的话，你要勇敢的走出来，跟你的牧师师母来谈这个问题，或者是你要寻求帮助，或者你是可以打电话给家庭暴力的热线，或者是 My Sister House 这样子的电话热线来寻求你的帮助。那也愿神在这样子的困难当中，你藉由这样子的帮助，你能够走出来在婚姻的暴力里面的阴影。
Rosa, we appreciate you taking the time to come down today to share your story. How did you meet your husband?
I met my husband through a friend of mine, a neighbor who was married to a U.S. citizen. My live-in partner had just died, so my neighbor gave me the address of a man her sister knew in the U.S. So we began corresponding via letters. I sent a picture to him and I introduced myself. I told him that I wanted to meet him. We wrote each other for 1 year and he decided to come to the Philippines. While he was here, he proposed. I truly felt he was the right guy for me, so I accepted.
Did he allow you to practice your own religion?
Even though we were both religious, we had different beliefs. I was deeply Catholic, but he was not. We were upfront about that. But when I arrived in the United States, he stopped letting me go to my church and told me I had to go to his church. He said that I needed to follow him, and he convinced me that his way was now my new religion. I didn't like that. My family has been Catholic for generations. We believe in patron saints, we use rosaries and a prayer book. He only used the Bible. I didn't feel it was fair to make me change what I believed.
Did he want you to practice and convert to his religion?
Yes, he really wanted me to convert. One day, one of my friends invited me to go to Mass with her, but my husband said no. He really wanted me to go to his church, and the abuse began in other areas as well. Not only sexually and verbally, but in my own opinion, all kinds of abuse. I didn't feel safe with him. When he visited me in the Philippines, he was good to me, but when I came here, the good turned to hurt. I didn't have any freedom as his wife. When my friends called and wanted to see me, he refused to let them.
From your family's spiritual point of view, what do you think your role is as a wife or mother?
As a wife, I wanted to share a common understanding and acceptance. And for him, as a husband, I wanted him to understand and accept my weaknesses.
What was your husband's point of view?
I felt I wasn't his wife. I believed he wanted me to come to the United States to use me. When I arrived, he told me to find a job because I have a kid. He also said to me that I had to earn money to pay his and my debt. And I could not say anything because he said I had to follow him. He would find scriptures he wanted me to read. He said it was our future, that this was for us. I had to start donating money to his religion, and we would receive donation requests in the mail, and I was forced to donate. He actually convinced all of his relatives to follow his religion. because he said it was the best religion.
Did you seek help from your church or spiritual leaders? And if so, how did they respond?
I didn't ask for help from my church because he didn't let me talk to other people about it. I just kept quiet and prayed to God that one day he would accept me and support me and help me with my difficulties. I prayed that my husband would want to help me and understand me.
How did you get help?
Well, at the time I was working in a restaurant. One day on my lunch break, I went to the police station to file a report. I told the police that I need to be safe from my husband because I'm afraid when I'm with him. Sometimes when we would argue, he held a gun, and one day he pointed it at me and said, "You see this gun?" And he told me he was going to kill me, and it occurred to me that he actually might do it. He told me that if I told anybody or reported it to the police, what he was going to do to me was beyond description.
How did the police respond?
The police told me that I needed to get out of my situation now, and they asked me what time I got off work. I said 12. And they told me that I need to tell my supervisor as soon as I got off work that I needed to call the police so they could come and get me.
How did you get safe?
That night, my supervisor helped me. My husband was waiting for me after work. He was always there waiting for me when I got off work. So they took me to the back door where my friend was waiting for me. She helped me hide. I felt so nervous that he would see that some of my coworkers were helping me. I felt very, very nervous.
And then what happened?
I felt I wasn't safe, so I left the state and I moved in with a friend of mine.
Are you able to practice your beliefs today?
In my faith, I always believe in prayer. I can't go to church because I don't have a car, and I don't have any friends that go there. I also don't know where the church is, so I just pray instead. My day is not complete without the rosary and my prayer book.
Rosa, what advice would you give to someone in your situation?
My advice to women who are in my situation is to look for a program like My Sister's House, or call the police or a friend so someone can help you and you can be safe.
Rosa, thank you again for sharing your story with us. When we come back, we shall seek the advice from a health professional with experience in working with survivors and victims of domestic violence. Welcome back to Healthy Relationships. We just heard from our special guests, Carol and Rosa, who were brave to recognize the signs of spiritual abuse and seek help. I sat down with Dr. Maura Sharma, a psychologist who has expertise in domestic violence. She currently works for Kaiser Permanente at the Outpatient Psychiatry Department in South Sacramento. Dr. Sharma, we just heard stories from Carol and Rosa. Please tell us, how unique are their stories?
Unfortunately, it isn't a unique story. It's a story that happens often in Asian Pacific Islander communities, as well as other communities with a whole host of different types of faiths. Spiritual abuse is a very common form of domestic violence that can occur in abusive relationships.
Can you tell us how our Asian Pacific Islander culture often prevents many women from leaving spiritually abusive relationships?
There are many aspects that messages within the Asian Pacific Islander cultures can serve as barriers to women who are experiencing spiritual abuse. And spiritual abuse is a common form of abuse that exists in domestic violence relationships, but it's often not discussed. So the pain, the abuse, they're often minimized in the mind of the victim, usually by the perpetrator or the abuser. Sometimes our religious institutions also minimize them. Carol, in her story, indicated that her abuser used different scriptures and said that him ruling the house was sanctioned or made it very normal according to the scriptures in the Bible. And then a lot of the Asian Pacific Islander cultures also are very patriarchal. So a lot of times men rule the household. A wife has to submit to the husband always. Also, there's the idea of not seeking help outside the family. It's a private issue. One must not bring shame to the family or God. So therefore, one can't or shouldn't tell what's happening within the family to outsiders. Community leaders may sometimes also look down on organizations like My Sister's House or other domestic violence organizations that seek to help women in unhealthy relationships. So additionally, some of the other aspects of cultural barriers are that some of the values indicate that women should be subservient, women should be passive, women should be very compassionate and have high tolerance for different types of abuse. And then some aspects of the culture is that some beliefs are that people are just very fatalistic. So if a person finds themselves in an abusive relationship, it's their fate. And if they pray hard enough, and they do right by God, maybe God will end the abuse, or God will at least give them the strength and endurance to tolerate the abuse. So all of these types of messages can serve as barriers for women who are in abusive relationships and spiritually abusive relationships to seeking help.
What are some signs that family members may be using religion or spirituality as an excuse for women to stay in an abusive relationship?
I have worked with a lot of women who have experienced different forms of spiritual abuse, and a lot of times they're hearing many common messages from people in their community and their family and their spiritual place of worship. They're hearing things like, you're not living up to your responsibility as a good Christian woman or a good Christian wife. You're not living up to the tenets of the Quran, or not being a good role model in Islam for your Muslim children. In the Hindu faith, many times women are criticized for not holding up their duty or sense of dharma in the relationship if they were to decide to leave, or if they decide to speak out against the abuse. People will also make comments about what are they doing to the family. Think of the shame you're bringing upon the family, or the shame you're showing in the face of God by talking about what are the family issues outside of the family. Also, they'll say, think about the children. Think about the children's souls and what type of a message you're saying if you are not living in the faith that promotes that you and the husband stay together and forever, to promote the spiritual well-being of the children. Other things that people will say is, think about the dishonor that you are exhibiting to your ancestors. So that's another aspect of Asian Pacific Islander cultures as well, is thinking about how it brings disgrace on the collective, the community, the family. Also, people will say, what will people think of you? What will the community think? What will God think of you? Almost a sense of shaming if someone decides to stand up against spiritual abuse that they are experiencing.
So, Dr. Sharma, what do you want our audience to remember?
So regardless of culture or faith, if you think you're in a relationship that might not be good for your health or your children's health, you need to get help. You're not alone. Help is out there. You can call agencies like My Sister's House. I would also encourage people to call and speak to their clergy person. A lot of times people are given the message that they just need to pray. And if they pray hard enough and do right by God, everything in the situation will correct itself. There was this story about a man who had a very strong faith in God, and he always said that if I pray and I do right by God, God will do right by me. And so what had happened was that there was these torrential hurricanes that came into where he lived. And where he lived, he decided to stay on the top of his roof thinking that God will save him. And so what happened is that as the floods rose, people were in boats and they came and they said, "Sir, come, we'll take you to safety. We can give you this lifesaver." And he said, "No, I have a strong faith in God. I will pray and I'll be able to endure this, and my God will save me." So then the next thing that happens is the Coast Guard comes, and he says, and with a ladder and a Coast Guard ready to basically say, "Sir, grab the ladder, hang on tight, and we'll take you to safety." And the man says, "No, I don't need to do any of that." You know, eventually, if I stay true to my faith, God will save me. And what happened is that the floodwaters continued to grow and grow and grow, and they swept him. And so as he goes and meets with God in the afterlife, he basically says to God, you let me down. I prayed to you. I stayed true to you. I thought you were going to help me. And God said, I sent you a person on a raft. I sent you a helicopter. I sent you a helicopter with a ladder. And you didn't get on. You didn't take any of these things. It's your role to meet me halfway. And so the message of the story is prayer is good. I'm not knocking prayer. But sometimes prayer alone cannot necessarily help a person out of a situation, and sometimes God works through different organizations and different other supports that you may not anticipate because maybe they're not shown to you in different types of religious symbolism. But there is help out there, and if you get help and you call for help, helping you not only helps yourself, but it also helps your children, and it helps break the cycle of violence, and it helps the future generations to come.
We'd especially like to thank today's guests, Carol, Rosa, and Dr. Sharma. Also, we'd like to give a special thank you to the Office of Violence Against Women for making this episode possible, and to the Crossing staff for the technical assistance. We hope that this show has encouraged you to evaluate the relationships in your life. Remember, if you or a loved one is ever in need of help from spiritual abuse or any other forms of abuse in a relationship, you can contact My Sister's House multilingual 24-hour helpline at 916-428-3271.
And don't miss this year's Run for a Safe Haven. It's happening at William Land Park in Sacramento on Sunday, November 5th. You can join the hundreds and help us in working toward homes without violence and lives without fear.
That's all for today's episode on healthy relationships. On behalf of My Sister's House, thank you for watching.